Hello, and welcome to the Ultimate Strategy Podcast, your go-to podcast for everything strategy. Each week, we'll share a new episode covering a wide range of topics designed to help your business grow smarter by making strategy both approachable and actionable. I am Miriam and Laura, and I'm Strategy Execution Director at Cascade.
And I'm Laura Blackmore, Head of Strategy Execution. Hi, everyone. We are excited to have you with us today. We've got a very exciting topic. But this is just the beginning, so stay tuned for weekly episodes that drop on your platform of choice. Before we dive in, let me thank today's sponsor, Cascade. Cascade is the #1 strategy execution platform that helps turn your visions into reality by working as the strategic brain of your organization. Thousands of businesses around the world use Cascade to plan, execute, and track their strategies all in one place, improving efficiency and speeding up decision-making. By successfully executing strategies, Cascade customers are making a huge difference, from deploying life-saving vaccines to engineering the fastest Formula One car. If you want to get your team moving toward your vision in one central platform, check us out at www.cascade.app. Now, let's get started. Miriam, I don't know about you, but I am super excited for today's topic. I think this is something that we're talking about all of the time with businesses around the world. And that's how do you get buy-in from your employees when it comes to strategy execution? I think for a long time, definitely over a decade, maybe even 2 decades, people are used to executing projects. It's really easy with the influx and there's thousands of tools available to execute projects and execute tasks, build checklists. I think people are really naturally used to those tools, but how do you actually set up a right governance process or a right strategy process that actually fits in with your culture? I think it's actually quite difficult. It's quite challenging. I think especially the larger your organization goes, engaging people and keeping them engaged more so is what's really difficult. But what's been your experience, do you think?
Yeah, I like this topic as well. And I think it's really where you'll see like how strategy is being truly lived in the organization. In my past role at Adidas, when I was kind of in charge essentially to execute the strategy for the organization, I went through a whole range of learnings, right? Like starting with all the challenges that I also see or not all, but many of our customers have today as well. And it starts just with, firstly, overall understanding why they have to do what they have to do. Why is this new strategy happening? What's in it for them? Why is there another change process? And then once they understand that, it comes down to what they actually need to execute. And that's usually where I find it's getting really, really tricky. And if the right mechanisms aren't in place, leaders don't talk about it in the right way, it can fairly quickly fall flat and just become either a busy work that they feel they have to do. And then that's not working because they're not truly bought in. They just feel like they have to check a box and they do it just for the sake of doing it, but they're not actually living it. Or the other thing is the process built around it doesn't even fully exist. And people are literally just kind of doing a little bit whatever they want. So I always find the truth lies somewhere in the middle between this empowerment of people to help them actually still create their own way of executing the strategy, but at the same time, create a strategic routine or process around it that helps to have some sort of governance, because ultimately the world is moving so fast. You want to continue to check in what's going on, and you want your team also to be connected to what's happening and establish some sort of like almost like a bit of a routine and framework around that. So I find there's so many things coming together. But I guess the biggest thing is, as we're starting off this discussion here, is really, I want to acknowledge everybody who's out there and struggling, because it is really, really hard. It's not easy, and it sometimes takes time, and it takes learnings, finding the right balance to really implement a solid strategic governance and routine process. But I'm curious to hear from you, Laura. I know you work with many customers as well, and hear from them what's working, what's not working, or also what's specifically potentially also a challenge as you're working with a tool like Cascade, for example, which is an additional element that you're introducing with a software solution. So I would love to hear about that as well a little bit.
Yeah, I think for me, like there's an element of like simplicity, but also participation when I think about getting a good, strong strategy execution culture. I think for a lot of people, when you talk about strategy, still a lot of people roll their eyes, or when they think about strategy, they think of frameworks like Hoshin Kanri or OKRs. And I think for a lot of people, they can't disconnect what strategy really means from the frameworks and the tools and the analysis that is run. So I like to always say, like, try and keep things simple as much as possible and ensure that early participation of people. I think, of course, there's a danger to involving people too early, when you don't have things figured out. But I think there's a right way in which you can roll out the strategy. So, for example, I was working with an organization recently that didn't have any elements of their strategy in place. And I'm talking, they didn't even have a vision. They were just sort of spinning their wheels and operating and were fairly successful, but they knew that they had a problem with their culture and they needed to really, drive a bit of focus on that. So, getting the vision in somewhat of a place before they got people to participate was the right thing for them to do, because it meant, hey, we're thinking about this vision. What are your thoughts? Instead of going out to the audience and saying, hey, we need you all to create a vision or all to come up with your ideas. And then you get like this fire hose of ideas. So I think striking the right balance of participating people in the right moments, but giving them something to start from. And I think that also leads me on to one of the most common things that I hear, not just from our customers at Cascade, but also from businesses in general, is getting that leadership buy-in and having a strong process. Like you said, if your leadership aren't bought into the long-term strategy that you're planning, or B, the process and the governance around how you deploy strategy, people are just going to be doing whatever they want. And the reality is you're not going to be as successful as you want if you don't have those two things in place. So I think that would be it for me. I think, I had an organization recently say that, getting a good strategy execution process in place or a good culture in place was a huge undertaking. It's a big change management process. And this organization had tens of thousands of people in it. But I think once people embrace the idea and see the value in adopting these new processes or new tools, I think that's when they start understanding what that motivation is for themselves. And I think we always talk about, and we've definitely talked about in previous podcast episodes, around having clear goals and connecting that to the performance, because then people have that intrinsic or personal motivation around, what's in it for them and how are they connected to the organization. So I think that would be it for me. What are the tips do you think you'd have around, maybe particularly the leadership buy-in? I think that's the hardest thing to embrace personally from what I've seen.
Yeah, I agree. I think leadership buy-in is absolutely key, and it is true. It's like it's not only understanding and buying into the vision, also communicating the vision or even the strategy, but then also buying into the process, living the process by example. I see a lot, like even like when I rolled it out at Adidas, but also now rolling it out with organizations here, I always see once the leadership team is embracing essentially that kind of like being that starting point of a new way of working or a new way of reporting things or a new routine, they're introducing it and then it's being cascaded to the rest of the organization. I like to differentiate usually between governance and strategic routines, because governance is really like that framework almost that kind of wraps around it, that helps to have those anchor points of what needs to be tracked and kind of gives almost the leadership team a little bit of the steering wheel back to understand what's happening. And the other thing is those strategic routines. And that's really where I think it's so critical to think more about what are already habits in place that your organization might have in terms of weekly meetings, monthly meetings, existing reports, and how can you leverage that, enhance it maybe through a software like Cascade, and bring that to your meetings and continue the conversation, starting every meeting with, let's say, the same strategy report. And if you start that at the leadership team level, I think that's, again, like the key for the leadership buy-in, but also role modeling it. And then you kind of like slowly cascade it down through the organization and have the different levels using it in a similar way. But it sets a bit of a precedent, I find, if the leadership team starts role modeling it, creates those habits, lives by example, creates new ways of working. And that's truly what I've seen whenever it comes to successful strategy execution. This was essentially the key to success. It's like getting the buy-in, living by example, and then also creating that like habit, that muscle in the organization to truly hone into that. And then also stay flexible, obviously, right? It's like you try it out, you say, okay, we're going to try it for 2-3 months, see how it goes, adjust, refine, improve, right? It's like nothing is set in stone. We're living in such a fast-paced, changing world, so we always have to stay agile. But yeah, it starts with the mindset, and I think that's the key for me, that I see as kind of like the key to success in many ways for the strategy execution.
What about
What
like
else did you see? Yeah, go.
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, it's something you mentioned around like the muscle and developing that at different levels of the organization. I think even thinking not just about the leadership team, but creating ownership amongst your team members. I think, some of the best cultures that I've worked at is where I feel really empowered to actually own what I'm delivering and set out my objectives and my KPIs and actually driving ownership of that. Obviously, it's difficult. Not everybody has that experience of building good strategies. But I think if you can really educate your people and take them on that journey and use the tools and the resources and the partners that you can rely on to help you do that, I think can be super effective as well. Because at the end of the day, everybody is coming in to do a great job. Why not make sure that they're actually set up to do that great job and they can deliver and they can execute? I think that's super important as well.
Yeah, and I think you touch on an important thing there, because it's also, there is this difference between, like, obviously everybody on the leadership team would want to hold their teams accountable, right? It's like this favorite word. I want to hold them accountable. We have to hold them more accountable. And if you're like just thinking you are an employee and you're hearing from your leadership team, they want to hold us more accountable, what does that make you feel? It makes you feel like you're not being trusted. They think you can't do your job. They want to control you more. So it puts yourself a little bit into that negative mind space. So I always say, what are the words that you're choosing to communicate with your team? Instead of like saying, we want to hold you more accountable, which you might still want to do, but how do you communicate about it? It's more empowering them, creating that level of ownership. But it's all, I find that there's so much about the how versus the what in terms of communication. And it really makes a huge difference for your teams if you tell them right straight out, hey, we're going to do this now to be more accountable. And then you have to report here and you have to report there. Like, just think for yourself, like, do you like to do that? Nobody does, right? But if you're getting an option to maybe share more about the work that you're doing because they want to see your contribution or want to see how you could potentially maybe collaborate with other teams, that's a whole other story, right? So another thing that I would,
I was just saying, I think like that's actually a really important bit that you said around the celebration. I actually don't think organizations do that enough. Nobody is celebrating enough, particularly around highlighting the good parts of the execution, like what things have gone well, how are the KPIs building. And everyone's always just looking for that next thing, or that next growth or the next project to implement. And I think actually taking time to reflect, and I know we've talked about reflection in a different podcast, but actually reflecting on what's actually gone well, celebrating the values that have been lived that are actually supporting that execution, not just like at a team level or not just at an individual level, but collectively as an organization. I think that's really important and not done enough, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I'm also curious to hear about another thing that just came to mind, because I find it so different. Like each culture in an organization is obviously so different in terms of what works and what doesn't. And I do work with some organizations. They say like, oh, we can't mandate anything at all. They have to do it by themselves. And other organizations, they're like, no, we have to like really like, has to be like
Govern.
hold the people accountable, governance and all. Again, it has to fit to your culture again. And I do think the truth lies in the middle. But what I find personally works really well to create a mechanism that holds people still accountable, but gives them the ownership back is to connect it to your performance system
Yeah.
and to connect essentially the goals that you ask people to work on that are your strategic goals, connect them to your performance system. Every year, every half year, they're getting evaluated. I am just going to share the example with Adidas. I shared that with another organization recently too. They were thinking, how do we do this? I thought this was really well done, the way we did it at Adidas. And it was also an evolution, but we had our big strategic initiatives and goals up there. And essentially, as individual, we had 5 goals for the year, and 3 of them had to be related to the strategic initiatives. So whatever we did, it had to have some sort of relationship contribution to the big organizational strategic goals. And then 2 of them would be more, you choose, like one is more like a team goal, like something your team is really working on. And then the last one would be a developmental goal for yourself. Like, how do you want to develop? Like, whatever you want to do, maybe attend whatever things or learning. So I thought it was a good way to bring things together, but also connect your strategy to ultimately the outcome that everybody wants to deliver, and you empower them. I don't know
Yeah.
what your experiences are around that and what you've seen maybe with organizations or your past roles, Laura.
Yeah, I think that approach is incredibly focused. Actually, it's like forcing people to only choose um, the really strategic things, but also then there's like that personal element to it, and then there's like the people element. I really like that approach. I think for me, some things that I've seen work in the past is actually that regular review. So I've worked in organizations that are maybe, we definitely didn't set annual goals, but we set more quarterly focused goals. And we were always calibrating. And I'm talking about businesses that move incredibly fast, very technology focused businesses. We had to reflect and review on a quarterly basis. We had to change things very, very quickly. But I think what I really saw is, or maybe an observation from my side is like, everything that I work on a daily basis is the strategy, but we don't talk about it as being the strategy. And so if you can help your people understand that what they're doing on a regular basis is the strategy at the end of the day, but that needs to connect back with the bigger picture. So you're getting that balance of the short-term thinking with the long-term thinking, and the long-term initiatives of the business and how the business is growing should still have that personal motivation and factor in it. So I think getting that, I like to call like the cadence or the routines or the governance, whatever word you want to use, or reflection, getting the right cadence for your business. And for some, it's annually. For some, it's even longer, 3 years. Can't actually think of too many organizations that are operating in that mindset anymore with how much the world changes, or how much the world is advancing. But maybe that's quarterly, or maybe that's monthly, or even weekly if you're an incredibly fast business. So I think just getting those routines right for your organization, but making time to reflect and calibrate the goals, but also linking it with that personal growth and motivation as well.
Yeah, I like that. I think the balance is so important. One other thing that came to mind as I'm just thinking more to get the buy-in and you're rolling out your strategy, I find oftentimes, again, we speak about that a lot, or we talk about it a lot, right? It's like, oh, here's the plan, boom, done. And then everybody has to run with it. I find, and again, like out of my own experience and what I've seen work successfully is, and this might be a word that you don't want to use with your strategy, but I find sometimes treating the initial, let's say, 3 to 6 months as you're rolling out your strategy a little bit like a project can be really helpful, because it keeps you and your team, and maybe you have some champions who help you establishing, or you work with us, for example, from Cascade, and we help you getting your strategic routines, your governance process, all of that rolled out, you work with someone who helps you and holds you, again, our favorite word, accountable. But working with a little bit of a project management mindset as you're rolling it out and get things established can be very, very helpful. And then it's almost like we always said at Adidas, like we're treating it like a project until we're integrating it into the business and it becomes a business as usual. And that's how I see in many ways how you're rolling out your strategy. In the beginning, you have to treat it a little bit like a project. And even and just to get it going, because you need a lot more of that, a little bit of the rigor, a little bit of the routines, there's new things coming. So there are so many elements around it. So if you just let it loose, it's kind of can easily go out of your control. But if you manage it a little bit like a project for a certain time, you can set a timeline almost, it makes it easier. And then it's being rolled on the business. And once it becomes this routine, you can say, okay, the work is closed in many ways and it's business as usual. I thought this was always helping me a lot. And I see that it with some organizations I worked with, that's what it was very successful as well, just to get it going. And then they're set up and they work well. But it takes some time. It takes a little bit of extra work after you created that strategy.
And I think anything new is always a bit awkward. That's what I always find when people are implementing like a new process or a new routine. It's always awkward at the beginning until like you start getting into that routine, like you say. So I think that's a good tip. Like go easy on your people, on yourselves as you embark on this new strategy execution journey.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. What else is there? Is there anything else? I think the only other thing that comes to mind for me is a bit more around, like especially when you're like considering it maybe as a project in the beginning or anything new that goes out, and you're playing it back to your people. Establishing that feedback loop, especially in the beginning, is so important, right? Because it makes the strategy better, it makes the processes better, it makes the content better. So getting through that initial feedback loop, which I think can also sometimes be a bit painful, because you're like, I did this, and then it's like, oh, but maybe this doesn't work or whatever. So I thought that was also usually a really good thing to do, just to go back and have the people who actually have to use it and work in it and live the strategy provide, or the process as well, provide that feedback, right? And then improve it, have them as you said earlier already as well, right? Like integrate them into the process of the creation early on. Otherwise, you create something and it kind of might fire back. So that was the one other thing that came to mind. What else is there? Are there any other tips? Yeah, go for it.
Well, I think we've definitely said it before. We categorically have said this before, but communicate. I think can't be said enough.
Yeah. I think we say that all the time, but it's so true. It's so important.
It is. I think we'll probably wrap it up there. I think we've talked about a lot in this episode, and I think hopefully everybody has found it insightful. I think rolling out new strategy execution processes, whether you're doing it every year or whether you're changing it this year, hopefully you've found some insightful tips and it helps you on your journey to better strategy execution.
Yeah, and make sure to tune in next week as we're going to be talking about another exciting topic. And also, if you like this topic or if you like this podcast, feel free to leave a comment or like it, share it with your colleagues so that more people can find us and be part of sharing what you like as well. So that would be amazing.
Yes, thank you. And don't forget to subscribe to the Ultimate Strategy Podcast. So every time we drop a new episode, you can check it out. Do let us know what else you'd like to hear from us. And a huge thank you to our sponsor, Cascade, for making this podcast possible.
Thanks for listening. And remember, great strategies are only as good as their execution.
So take action, make it happen, and see the results. See you in the next episode for your weekly dose of strategy.